Kemi.
Well, indeed, as my honourable friend says, the Welsh Government's violence against women and girls strategy has been pioneering delivery on this important issue for 2 years now. The UK Government's aim of halving violence against women and girls in a decade is ambitious, and learning lessons from the Welsh Government really will help. South Wales Police have introduced new measures as part of their long-standing commitment to tackling violence against women and girls, including the Cardiff Safety Buses, which have received national recognition for their work, safeguarding more than 3,000 vulnerable people on the streets of Cardiff since September 2021.
Do you always deliberately save the last question before PMQ?
It's up to you, Mr. Speaker. You always call me a very kind. Thank you very much. Obviously, when it comes to tackling violence against women and girls, it can all be done regionally. But is it not time, Mr. Speaker, that this is done on a national level, where England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland work together to deal with the issue of violence against women and girls? Thanks so much.
Thank you. Minister.
Well, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. That's why it is absolutely central to our manifesto, with commitments that will take in the whole of the UK, particularly commitments from the Home Office and policing, and in legislation that we intend to bring forward.
We now start with questions to Prime Minister Andy MacDonald.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by welcoming the fall of Assad? The people of Syria suffered for far too long under his brutal regime. Mr. Speaker, what comes next is far from certain. We've been talking to regional and global allies to ensure that it is a political solution that protects civilians and minorities and absolutely rejects terrorism and violence. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later on today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister in welcoming the fall of Assad and the hope now for the Syrian people. Mr. Speaker, since it returned to Labour control under Mayor Chris Cook, Middlesbrough Council has not only been taken out of government intervention in terms of children's services and a best value notice, but is also on track to becoming financially stable. I know the Prime Minister will want to join me in congratulating Mayor Cook and the Council on its recent successes. But after 14 years of Conservative austerity, can the Prime Minister confirm that the spending review will not simply end, but will unwind austerity and provide the resources councils need to properly serve our communities?
Prime Minister.
Well, I join him in paying tribute to the Mayor and all local representatives across the country who do a fantastic job, even when funding was cut to the bone under the last 14 years of the Tory government. Mr. Speaker, we're boosting local government funding by £4 billion, investing £1.6 billion to improve roads. And I was proud to see the work on the carbon capture cluster in Teesside, which will create 2,000 new jobs.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister didn't seem to want to talk about appointing fraudsters to his cabinet. In fact, he seemed to want to talk about immigration. So let's talk about immigration. He has relaunched yet again. Many new targets, 6 milestones, 5 missions. But why was cutting immigration not a priority?
Speaker, I'm glad she now wants to talk about immigration. Last week she said she didn't, and for good reason. Because the previous government presided over record high levels of immigration. The figures just a few weeks ago, nearly 1 million on net migration. That is unprecedented. A one-nation experiment in open borders under the last government. And she was the champion. She stood up and praised the then Tory Home Secretary for listening to her on removing caps on migration visas. So she was applauding it. Now she's furious about what she was campaigning for. We will drive it down. We will drive down lawful migration. We'll drive down illegal migration.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about open borders. He was the one campaigning for free movement. I was in this House asking for a lift on skilled migration. He was there supporting all of the people who should not have been in this country. He wanted us to relax immigration. But as he's so keen to talk about the past, let's look at his record. 4 years ago, the Prime Minister signed a letter demanding that foreign criminals be allowed to stay in Britain. Dozens of Labour and Liberal Democrat MPs repeatedly signed these letters insisting that rapists and murderers be allowed to stay here. One of those criminals, Ernesto Elliott, had 17 convictions, including for knife crime. After his deportation was blocked, Elliott went on to murder someone. He was able to stay here and murder because people like this man campaigned against deporting criminals. Will he apologise for signing these letters?
Mr. Speaker, I'd firstly remind her that when we're in the number now, under their watch, of migrants coming to this country, nearly 1 million, is over 4 times the number when we're in the EU. They lost control of the borders. And the particular example she puts to me is an example of failure under her government to take the necessary measures to keep our country safe.
Kemi,
Mr. Speaker, this is a ludicrous assertion. He is the one who was repeatedly signing letters. He even asked us to pause all deportations. He doesn't want to talk about his past, Mr. Speaker, but that letter is just the tip of the iceberg. There is more. The Prime Minister actually complained that the immigration system was working to deter migrants rather than provide support. He said, and I quote, that he was proud to have served as Jeremy's shadow immigration minister. He boasted that he took the last Labour government to court for cutting benefits for asylum seekers. He said he would never set a target-based approach to immigration. He wants to talk about immigration. Let's talk about his record. We can talk about it all day. I have committed... Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he wants to talk about immigration. I have committed to a cap on migration. Why won't he?
Mr. Speaker, she talks about my record. For 5 years, I was the chief prosecutor prosecuting people who went to prison, many of whom were then deported. So while she's talking, I was actually doing the hard yards of convicting those that should be in prison. And she presided over record numbers of asylum seekers in this country, a record number of lawful and irregular migrants. That is 14 years when they lost control of the borders. They set a cap for each of those 14 years. It wasn't hard. It didn't stop people coming, and it got a record number. They should apologise for what they've done with their open borders policy.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer a single...
Do you want to leave? If you've not got the guts to stand up to the comments, you shouldn't be in here.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer a single question. He never answers questions. He wants to talk about the past. The fact is, we've acknowledged where things went wrong. He will never take responsibility. He will never take responsibility. The fact is, he has scrapped a deterrent that the National Crime Agency has said we need. Since he came into government and scrapped the Rwanda deterrent, small boat arrivals have increased by nearly 20%. His own MPs are complaining about having to house asylum seekers. So can the Prime Minister tell the House how much more his government will spend on hotel accommodation because he scrapped the deterrent?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd invite her to tell us what went wrong under the last government, but it'd take us all afternoon. Mr. Speaker, we are going to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade. We signed a landmark agreement with Germany this week.
Order. Mr. Philp, you've been very loud. I think now we're going to have a little bit of silence from you, Prime Minister.
This week we signed a landmark agreement with Germany. She should be welcoming that, because that will make sure we have the powers to take enforcement action across the continent where it is needed. We've set up the Border Security Command. We've committed £75 million on top of the existing £75 million. We're extending the powers, so they're counter-terrorism-like powers. We've retired 9,400 people who shouldn't be here. A record flight got off. They talk about getting the flights off. They did it for years. They didn't succeed. We got the flights off.
Mr. Speaker, he says he wants to smash the gangs. The only thing he smashed is his own reputation. The fact is, what he has been agreeing is not going to do anything. The cost of the Iraq agreement is £500,000. That wouldn't even buy a house in his constituency. Many of the things he's taking credit for are our agreements. Let's talk about what he put in his manifesto. The Prime Minister promised to end asylum hotels. He promised, he's the Prime Minister now, he promised, but in Altrincham and Peterborough, his government is expanding the use of asylum hotels because he unilaterally disarmed the deterrent. In fact, Mr. Speaker, a man who arrived by small boat told Sky News he was happy Labour were in power. That man said the Conservatives, and I quote, wanted to deport us, but Labour are making the procedure easier for us. He's right, isn't he?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I really thought she should welcome the Iraq deal. Anybody who wants to deal with this vile trade would have welcomed it. She should also welcome the German deal that we did this week. Many of the boats that are finding their way to the Channel are coming through Germany. That is well documented. There's been a difficulty in taking enforcement action, which if she spent more time researching that than her terrible jokes, she would know about. And we have signed an agreement to smash and take enforcement action in Germany to stop those boats getting to the coast. That is effective action. She should welcome it. It's really good news. All law enforcement think it's a good thing. Why does she think it's a bad thing?
Because the numbers are going up, Mr. Speaker, under his watch. The Prime Minister has consistently backed criminals over law-abiding British people. He defended terrorists like Hizb ut-Tahrir in the European Court. He argued all immigration law had a racist undercurrent. He voted against life sentences for people smugglers. He voted against more than 100 measures to control migration. He even said it was wrong. He even said, Mr. Speaker, that it was wrong when the Conservatives took away Shamima Begum's citizenship. Now he has appointed her defence lawyer as his Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, events in Syria mean we may see more small boat arrivals. For once, will he take the side of the British people and strip citizenship from jihadi terrorists and supporters of Assad who want to come back and destroy this country?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I was Director of Public Prosecution for 5 years. Unlike anyone on their benches, I was prosecuting for 5 years hundreds of thousands of criminals. That includes huge terrorist gangs, rapists. I was working for 3 of those 5 years with the then Home Secretary Theresa May, who commended the work that I did at the end of those 5 years. So for her to stand there and say, I haven't done anything in law enforcement, I dedicated 5 years of my life to law enforcement, locking up criminals, which is more than she can say. And it would be easier to take the opposition seriously if they actually got serious. Not a slither of remorse, not a hint of contrition. It's like the arsonists complaining about the people who are trying to put the fire out. And all they do is come every week with more and more complaints. Just wait till they get their hands on the people that created the mess that we are clearing up. We're fixing the economy, we're ending their open borders policy, we're taking down the waiting list. That's what people voted for. We're delivering it.
No law.
Mr. Speaker, since in the last couple of months, since I spoke to the Prime Minister here about the need for social and industrial investment in Cornwall, we've had a fresh tranche of shared prosperity funding, a huge boost to international interest in our most cleanest energy industries, and we've had a roadmap to greater political autonomy that reflects Cornwall's unique national identity. Will the PM join his minister on that visit in the spring to meet with the industry firsthand and spell out a roadmap for Cornwall to helping Britain become a clean energy superpower?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. He's a champion of the extraordinary potential of Cornwall, particularly in our transition to clean power by 2030. Next week we'll publish our English devolution white paper, setting out our ambitions to move power from Westminster into every part of England, including Cornwall. And I know he and his colleagues are meeting the Deputy Prime Minister to discuss this next week.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While Syrians are rejoicing at the overthrow of the brutal Assad regime, many people there and around the world are worried about what comes next, as the Prime Minister indeed said, with the threats of extremism, ISIS terrorism and unsecured chemical weapons. Only an open political process can bring peace and stability, but that will require the full backing of the international community. So does the Prime Minister share my concern that President-elect Trump said about Syria, and I quote, "The United States should have nothing to do with it"? If America walks away and steps away, will he step up and work with other allies to provide British leadership over Syria?
Prime Minister.
He's right to say this is a very serious moment. We all welcome the fall of Assad. I hope this can be a turning point for Syria, a much-needed turning point, but that is by no means guaranteed, and that is why we've been speaking intently and intensely with our allies in the region across the globe about how we ensure that this is peaceful, it is political, and it's a rejection of terrorism and violence. This could be a turning point, but in the past we've always thought that what comes next is necessarily better. That hasn't turned out to be the case, and that's why we're working so hard on this and showing the leadership that he and the House would expect from this government.
Sir Ed Davey.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that reply, and I hope we can continue to work on a cross-party basis to do Britain's role in securing peace and stability in the Middle East. But moving on to another subject, Mr. Speaker, British farmers are the best in the world. Yeah. They are the best in the world because of our tradition of family farms, where from generation to generation a commitment to high-quality food, to our precious environment, animal welfare, is passed down. But family farms were let down badly by the last Conservative government, with their botched transition to new payment schemes and their unfair trade deals with Australia and New Zealand that have undercut British farmers. Now, many family farms feel the government's budget will be the final blow. So will the Prime Minister change course and recognise the vital role that British family farms play?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, we put £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years. That's a record number under the budget. Last week alone, £350 million to support farmers in the United Kingdom. That does contrast with the last government, who was an underspend of £300 million in relation to farmers. In relation to inheritance tax, as he knows, in a typical family case, the threshold is £3 million, and therefore the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected, despite the fear-mongering of the party opposite.
Bill Brittle.
Speaker, places of worship are vitally important, not just for practising one's faith, but also for local heritage. The government's Places of Worship grant scheme currently provides much-needed tax relief for religious buildings in need of renovation, but is scheduled to end next year. What assurances can the Prime Minister provide my constituents that the government will continue to support restoring our much-cherished places of worship, such as Holy Trinity Church in Horwich?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for that question and recognise the important roles that these buildings play at the heart of communities, particularly, Mr. Speaker, at a time like Christmas. There are a wide range of funds available for maintenance and restoration, including the National Lottery Heritage Fund's Places of Worship scheme. Details will be confirmed in the usual way by departments at the spending review.
Hannah.
Mr. Speaker, last week my neighbours Omar and Delma Al-Shishkaki, who serve South Belfast as a doctor and a classroom assistant, received the news that they have been dreading. Dalal's mother and brother were among 23 Gazans killed in their tent by an Israeli airstrike in the so-called humanitarian zone of Al-Mawasi, and other family members are fighting for their lives in a barely functioning health system. Prime Minister, the crisis in Gaza is getting worse and not better. None of us in this chamber can end their nightmare, but we can do more. This government have rightly used every tool at their disposal, sanctions on arms and trade and officials against Putin's Russia. When will Israel be held to the same standards for genocide? When will this government confirm further sanctions, recognise the state of Palestine and offer some hope to beleaguered Gazans and many millions who are watching on in horror?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by saying I'm sorry to hear of the dreadful loss of the families of her constituents. There have been far too many examples like that. I was pleased to see that there's now a ceasefire in Lebanon.